Okay, what's up everyone? Shane, aka Wild Poker, coming back at you with another subscriber hand history review. This one was sent to me by Apachu, as you guys can see on the screen. He went from a 5, stars coin entry tournament and found himself in this, after a series of events, found himself in a $55 buy-in tournament, so good results for him. He sent me all the hand history from this tournament to review, and I'm happy to do that. And yeah, we're going to check it out. Hopefully we can find some good stuff here. So we're in the big blind first hand. I think versus 3x open, folds reasonable. And just folding here. Good. Easy fold. So far, easy tournament, no decisions to be made. Queen 10 suited here, I think we could call being super deep. It's going to be a hand that's going to play well in a multi-way pot deep. Queen 10 off here, I think, unless we have some reads that, like this guy's super tight and is folding all the time, and maybe these guys are really tight and folding a bunch of very, very bad. I think we always fold this hand, so good. This is fine. I think, you know, the current trend in MTTs is just to defend super, super wide in your big blind versus min raises. But I think there's a lot of people that are overdoing it, and defending with any two cards is certainly not the answer from early position, mid position opens. Suited hands versus min raises, we're going to definitely want to be defending a little more. But 10-3 offsuit is a clear, and hands of this caliber are just definite fold, so happy to see that. $10-7 suited, getting a discount. Being this deep, I don't think we're going to be seeing as many 3-bets, which means that you're going to call, and it's probably not going to get 3-bet very often. This is a hand that's going to play okay. You're getting a discount because of the small blind. I think we can actually call here with the 10-7 suited and try to play a pot post flop. And that would be okay. Queen Jack offsuit here. This hand it's at like 100 big blinds. I would end up probably folding this a bunch. When we're even deeper, and I think people are going to play quite a bit more straightforward, and you're probably going to be able to generate a little bit more fold equity post flop. And again, because of the depth, people probably aren't 3-betting as much from the blinds for squeezes. I think we can end up maybe start calling some of these hands and using our positional advantage in our chip stack to maybe maneuver a little bit more than we would in some other pots when stacks are a little bit shallower. So we could consider calling there. So one thing to consider is, like, the deeper you are, the more value position has, which means the wider your calling range can become. And hands that can make the nuts, like Queen Jack, which can make the nuts straight, when he can make very strong hands like 2 pairs, sets, things like that, are going to be pretty darn good for you. Here, versus a limp, I think we can raise the A7 for value. Checking back is also okay, but I think this is strong enough to just raise for value. And our ace high is going to be good quite often here already. I think we have the best hand a lot. And if it's not the best hand, we still have some outs to improve. We do have some backdoor straight outs as well. I would definitely be calling here on the flop. All right, we're going to see flop here. 2 pair seems nice to me. Yeah, definitely going to start with a check here. This is a board where I would definitely be considering check raising my pocket 2s and my pocket 4s. And if we have some 2-4 suited type stuff here, I'd be check raising those. Ace 4 when you block some of his ace-x combos. And it's somewhat of a dry board. I mean, there are some flush draws out there, but really from his range, he shouldn't have many straight draws. And I guess he could have like a couple backdoor straights, like with king queen and queen jack and stuff like that. But really, I think he's probably often not all that strong here, given your blockers and given the board texture. So I think we could start with a check call. We're going to be repping 4x in our range. We're going to rep 2x, smaller pocket pairs, some flush draws that didn't check range, check raise, and things like that. So I could go for a call here and try to get a barrel in on the turn. When you are deep, though, as far as the check raise line, when stacks are really deep, it does benefit big hands to try to put more money in the flop to build a bigger pot going into the turn, if you ever want to try to play for stacks. So, I mean, against some guys, check raising is certainly an option here. And I don't think this is going to be a bad play. I just think given the board texture that we might end up just getting a bunch of extra folds given our specific hand here. Okay. Let's actually turn the HUD on, because eventually we're going to start getting reads on players. You could certainly, I think this is pretty much a mandatory limp right here with a 6-7. You could consider even raising for isolation and you know, maybe some fold equity versus like some stronger hands on the flop against that this guy could have in his range. But we're trying to see a flop here, I guess, is the main goal. On the button, I mean, definitely a lot of value here with the 6-7. And you could even limp here, and if one of these guys make it 5 or 6 big blinds, you're deep enough and your hand is good enough and you have the best position, you could even call at that point. So we're never ever folding this hand here. Okay, we got 7-10 suited here. I think this is a reasonable open from this spot, unless you've got some aggressive 3-betters left to act after you. I think we can make some opens with our suited connected hands here. We do go for the open. Beautiful. We get called. And this is a reasonably dry board. I think in his range he's going to have probably quite a bit of 3x and 4x that are going to check call 1 and fold to a barrel on the turn. So that's something to keep in mind. But we do have, I think, a little bit of a range advantage here, given that, I mean, we still can have all the sets. He can't have the set of queens most of the time, and he also is not as likely to have the strongest queens, ace queen, and like some of the king queen suited. It's probably 3-bet pre-flop. So I think we're doing okay here on this board to bet the flop, and probably only a third pot c-bet is needed, maybe like 40% at the most. What we're trying to get to fold are hands like 8-9, 10-8, 10-9, you know, that kind of stuff. That's going to fold to the flop bet, and then we're just putting in a small bet. Like I said, a 3 or 4 is going to call, and then we can barrel the turn and get most of those to fold. And we do go for a little bit over half pot. I don't think we need the sizing on this board texture. It's not as draw heavy or as dynamic as like a queen 10-8 or, you know, something of that texture. Might require a little bit bigger bet sizing. This one, really, there's not too much out there. We get the call. Ace on the turn. He does have some ace-x in his range, ace-5, ace-2, ace-3, ace-4, you know, the ace-x of spades, and diamond combos as well get here. But I still think that we're going to have probably a slight range advantage here on this turn, so something that I'm okay to just keep barreling. And again, we're expecting to get a lot of a ton of 3x and 4x in his range that continued here that probably end up folding to the barrel, and other pairs and things like that as well. So we fire out about a half pot again, and he folds. Nice. And on the turn, I do like sizing up a little bit, so I would probably go something like half pot myself, or, you know, just slightly over. Get the walk. Easy game. Assuming we're folding here. Good. Versus a cutoff open, ace-9 is okay to play, unless you got some aggressive reshove stacks here, or squeezing guys that are 3-betting a bunch. This range is going to be wide enough that I think ace-9 with position is going to be doing okay to call. So a little bit, I would be totally fine folding ace-9 offsuit against this open and this open. I think these ranges are tight. There's a big gap typically between like this guy's opening range and the cutoff's opening range. Cutoff is where it really starts getting wider, and so hands like ace-9 are going to be doing okay. To put in the call there. And ace-3 is definitely an open. Now that stack sizes are starting to get shorter, you're seeing a 40 big blind stack size here, 60, 75. I mean, these guys were still somewhat deep, but I might start getting down to like a 2.5x open sizing, and not get a little bit further away from the 3x open size, but this is still okay. We get 2 callers. My guess is this board isn't particularly awesome for anybody. We do have backdoor straight potential, backdoor flush potential. The good news is this guy's passive, so we could actually consider just checking and trying to realize some of our equity that way. Multi-handed, c-betting and barreling needs to happen much less, so we need to be a little bit more careful about the hands that we're choosing. I think this one is okay as a bluff, just because really with the ace-high here, we don't have an incredible amount of showdown value in multi-way with our weak kicker. And like I said, we do have those backdoors that can barrel. But the more passive guys get that are in position, I do tend to, even if though it's just a little bit of showdown value, I do tend to value the showdown value a little bit more, just because these guys aren't going to try to get us to fold as often. So I think a check is okay there. I think if you wanted to consider putting out like a 30% pot bet and with the plan to barrel a club or a 5 or a 4 or something like that, that would be okay as well. Gets checked around. He's betting a 3rd pot. Heads up, if we had checked back, I think we would probably end up floating this here with our ace-high. And we would end up using like a king, queen to bluff if he checked to us, and then an ace we could consider a small value bet. And then on some blank cards it's going to go check, check, and we have a small amount of showdown value. But with this guy left to act, I think we just end up folding here. This one's, so the 10-3 was a very clear fold. Hands that can make straights become a little bit stronger to call when you're getting a good price, just because it's a little bit easier to realize your showdown value. It's pretty obvious on what flops, when you flop a gut shot, or when you flop any kind of straight draw, that's your obvious continue flops, and then on the ones where you don't flop anything, it's your obvious fold flops. But even still, this is one of the worst ones as far as that connectivity, so I think a fold is okay. But just keep in mind that these, I would value this 3-6 a little bit more than I would value the 10-3, even though the 10-3, as far as like the absolute strength, is better. If you're looking for a couple hands to add into a defending range for min opens, I would add this before I add the 10-3, I guess, is the moral of the story. 10-8 suited in a 6-handed setup where that's only 8 hands. I mean, I haven't seen I guess he 3-bet one that I skipped over or something. I guess he 3-bet. Under the gun, I guess we could make like 9-10 suited, kind of the bottom of our range, and fold 10-8 suited, and that would be okay. But these suited connectory hands, especially in 6-max when there's antes involved, you can start putting in like your 2.2x opens or min opens, depending on what your range size is. But I don't think we have to fold this unless we're at a particularly very, very tough table. Antes make a big difference. So like in a cash game, unless there's a ton of very weak players at the table, I'm probably just folding this because there's no antes. There's no extra incentive to pick the pot. But when you have an ante game and you can get away with min raising a lot like you are able to in tournaments, you can start adding hands like this into your opening range. Three bet here is okay. I've only seen a couple hands on this guy, and he seems like he's being pretty aggressive. He is opening larger, which does add a little extra incentive to just try to take the pot down right away. We have the ace blocker. Sizing to 11 seems reasonable at these stack depths, and given his open sizing. We do get called. And here, I mean, he's going to have some stuff that connects with this, but I still think we have a decent amount of fold equity. I'm perfectly cool just firing out like a 10 big blind c-bet or 9 big blinds, somewhere in there. And the plan would be to barrel a diamond, basically. Okay, we do fire half pot, looks like. And he folds. Yeah, I think as far as the fold equity that you're generating, with this hand, you're probably generating almost the exact same amount of fold equity with a 9 big blind c-bet here as you are with the 11.39. So you're just giving yourself a better price on the bluff, and I would look for spots like that where you can c-bet smaller on the flop, and then if he does call, with the value part of your range. And with your bluffs, with some of your bluffs, you can look to size up on the turn and look to get more money in on the later streets that way. So something to keep in mind. I think this is a reasonable 3-bet here as well against this guy who's been quite active so far. So I would be totally okay with seeing a 3-bet here. Calling is okay as well. We got a 0-3-bet over 35 hands. So if you call and he calls, I mean, that's fine as well. Flopping a pair. With the ace kicker in our hands, I think we can just check call here with some other, like let's say we had, well, we're never going to have, what do we have maybe here? 4-5 suited would be the only other suited type hand that I think we would end up having here, or the other 4. With that, we might want to consider check raising just to protect our hand a little bit, and charge him a little bit of a fee to get to the turn with his king X, queen X, ace X type stuff. But when we do have the ace blocker, I think check calling is a little bit better. We do end up check raising here. I actually don't think we need to go this large again. Probably even something like 5.5 big blinds would be reasonable for us to be check raising with our bluffs. We're going to mix in some 8x there and then some protection with our 4x. So when he's betting a third pot, we can get away with some pretty small check raises. Stack sizes aren't super shallow, so maybe the 5.5 fits a little bit better, and when stacks are like 30 big blinds pre-flop or more shallow, but I still think we can get away with something a little bit smaller here. He calls. I think we're just wanting to check here. Or consider a very small block bet. I don't think we want to turn this hand into a bluff. We just have too much showdown value. And obviously when he calls a check raise, his range is somewhat stronger, although I think there are going to be some just floats here that are suspicious because you're check raising on such a dry board. But I'm not going to be... I think if you're the one putting more money in the pot, you're just getting all the hands that you have crushed to fold. And you're just having him continue with a bunch of stuff that has pretty decent equity with you and then has position and can probably get us to fold on a lot of rivers. So I would check in and kind of see what he does. We do bet and he folds, and he probably just ended up with a hand like, Queen Jack or something that I guess Queen Jack might call again given the 9 turned. But he just probably ended up with just one of those floats that I was talking about that really we don't mind if we check and it bets. Is the most likely case there. And easy open here. I think we want to see bet here for third pot on this board texture. He donks into us. With the 3s here, I don't mind raising now. You're doing a combination of a bunch of things. You're value betting against some parts of his range that are betting here. You're turning your hand into a bluff against some parts of his range, like the 4x and 5x. You're protecting against, some parts. I mean, you're doing a lot of things here. We're just raising right now. When he's donking into you on this board, and I do think, I don't really think he necessarily has range advantage. I think you guys are probably somewhat similar, except for you can have the pocket jacks where he very likely can't, so you're probably slightly ahead. Calling with position is okay, but I think a raise would definitely be acceptable here. And we get to the turn, and he's betting half pot. There's still things like maybe some ace-2s. We do block ace-3, which is kind of a bummer. We block things like 6-3, which is a bummer, but there's still 6-7. The ace-2, maybe some just pure bluffs that are in there. And then also there are some rivers where we can turn our hand into a bluff if it gets checked to us. I think with the 3s here, we're probably just still calling again. We get the king on the river. He checks. So if we bet here, we're repping King Jack that I think could have played this way. We're repping King Queen that certainly would have floated the flop and continued. King 10 that certainly would have floated the flop and continued on the turn. Ace King. And I don't know. We could have some slow played like pocket jacks that call down and are betting here. Some slow play 10s that just call the turn as well. So I think we have a pretty okay range here to turn the 3s into the bluff, and we're hoping to get his weakest Jack X, his 4x, and his 5x, and maybe some of his pure bluffs that were just donking on the flop that had the turn to 10x to fold. I don't really expect Jack X to ever fold, but some guys might. If we rip in a pretty decent sized bet here, find the fold to that. So on this river here, I do think we just want to turn our 3s into the bluff. This is one of probably the better cards for us to do that. And I don't think we want to overbet here because we're probably not. I mean, we're probably not repping a ton of bluffs. When we called flop, called turn, we're repping something with some showdown value. I don't think we're just floating with like, I don't know, 8-9 a bunch on this flop and 7-8 and things like that. So we don't get to this river with like an insane amount of bluffs, which means that probably doing something like 3/4 pot or something like that is a little bit better than going for the big overbet. And we end up for going close to pot. I mean, that's still reasonable. I think something big, but not in the overbet seems like the best sizing for me. And he folds, and I like that. Well played. I would say also, let's go back to this real quick. I would say if we had any of our stronger 5s here, so ace 5, our queen 5 suiteds, that's about it. I think once we get to that range, we're probably strong enough to just check back the river and expect enough showdown value where we don't need to turn our hand into a bluff. With the threes, we're trying to get all of his 5x and all of his 4x to fold when we bet this river. So once we get into a strong 5, I just don't think there's enough stuff that we're trying to get to fold that makes it worth turning our hand into a bluff. Probably with all of our 4x, we're cool with just turning all those to bluff. But when you get in the very top of our 5x range, I do think checking back is going to be the better option. Okay, that's all. Opening here for sure. King high board. I do like the block bet, c bet. Relatively dry board as well. He calls. We get the 8 of clubs turn. I do think you could consider overbetting this turn. When we get here, I guess he could have maybe some like king 10 suited that decided not to raise versus your small bet, or some, you know, king jack offs. But I think king queen probably wants to raise a little bit. Ace king probably 3 bets pre-flop. He's probably somewhat capped when he just calls your small c bet on the flop here, is the point that I'm trying to get to. And is more likely to have like a bunch of pairs lower than the king, 9x, spade draws, you know, things like that. And this is a turn where we could consider developing an overbet value bet range with our strongest king x and our set of threes, and adding in this as a bluff I think makes quite a bit of sense. We go with another small block bet. I don't think a small bet sizing here is the answer. I think we definitely want to size up to something pretty large. Basically what we're doing here is just giving him a great price to continue with all of his 9x, all of his other weak pairs, his spade draws, his hands like jack 10, queen jack, better ace x than us, you know, ace 10, stuff like that. Might even consider continuing if it has the spades to bluff on a like ace of spades 10, to bluff on a spade river, all that kind of stuff. So with our value hands and with our strong bluffs, I think a bigger bet sizing is definitely what we're going to want to be using here on this turn. And we get this total blank river, and now we're kind of left in a spot where we probably feel like we want to bluff because we bet so small flop and turn, but what are we repping now when we bet large, right? I think all of our stronger kings probably would have wanted to bet bigger flop and turn. Our sets, our 2 pairs, things like that. So I don't think we have a super profitable bluff. The only option I could consider is checking and maybe considering calling some of the time to, one, because I don't think he has many king x here, and we're going to try to pick off some value versus like his missed spade draws. So I would probably go for that line, or check and hope it checks back and we'll win sometimes. But I don't think we turn this into a bluff. And he has pocket 10s, and yeah. I think with our overbet on the turn, once we overbet the turn, we do get the option to jam quite a few more rivers because we're repping a very, very strong range. So keep that in mind. Folding. I'm comfortable with just folding this here. Probably 8-5 suited, 8-6 suited, 8-7 suited in position. Even versus this size raise, I would be calling. I mean, this isn't much different than 8-5 suited, so it's probably okay. Our suited stuff in position when we have some stacks to play for is probably going to be having enough equity to call. I mean, you can see here, we only need 32% equity against a guy that's playing very aggressive, opening in the cutoff. All of our suited hands are going to be there. And because we have position, it's going to be a little bit easier for us to realize all that equity. Easy fold. I don't like min opening in the small blind. You're just giving him an incredible price to continue with everything. I do like it exploitatively against guys that we have a read that some sort of read that we are going to understand how they're going to react very well to it, and then we are making some sort of exploitative adjustment. But readless, there's this, you might as well just limp. I mean, it's essentially the same thing. Limp, or I would go to 3x, or like this guy's doing 3.5 is actually kind of a nice open sizing in a small blind when stacks are a little bit deeper, given that there's antes and things involved. So he calls. We do flop with a top pair, so definitely C betting here. Against tough competition, we're going to want to be checking here on this board a lot. And the reason being is this is a board texture where people just tend to c-bet their top pair and 10x and strong draws and everything at way too high of a frequency. And so against a strong player, if you're doing that, when you start checking, he basically knows that he gets to bet 100% of the time and pretty much always win the pot. So we need to make sure that we're checking hands like this at a very, very high frequency to go for check raises or check call downs. With the queen nine, I'd probably just check call. But that is something to keep in mind. So we do bet here. He puts in a 3-bet. Definitely gonna have to call here. There's plenty of bluffs. I mean, he could be doing this with 10x for protection, maybe some 5x. He's turning into kind of a bluff protection bet. We kind of ripped a little bit of a weaker range with the min open, so there's a whole lot of reasons that we are going to end up calling here. We get the 10 on the turn. I think here if he ends up betting pretty large, we are going to want to consider folding here. Reason being is once we bet call here, we're repping some pretty decent queen x, some pretty decent 10x, and then some big draws. I mean, I don't think we're getting here with a very weak range. And when he's betting on raising the flop and then betting the turn, I think he's repping incredibly strong range. Like I said, sometimes 10x is raising here. But a lot of times people will see this 10 and assume that it's really good for our range. And maybe necessarily it's not. But they'll see the 10 pair on the turn and they'll give up with some of their bluffs because now the board paired and they can't rep sets or two pairs as much, and you don't have that kind of thing to go. So I think bluffs tend to the bluff frequency tends to go down a little bit when you see the middle card pair here on the turn. We donk into him. For all the things that I said, right, if we're expecting him not to bluff as much on this turn, I think that means when we check to him, we're going to get a little bit more honest reaction about what he's doing and what his range is. So I prefer to see a check a little bit more just to, get a feel for the situation. And see what he does. But however, in a lot of it depends. It's hard to know, without any reads on a player. But I think in general, people are probably going to suspect that this 10 is better for our range than it is for their range, which is something I was hinting at. Which means that on the 10 turn, maybe there are a lot of stuff in our range that just wants to start donking out as bluffs and for value, for protection, things like that. So we would have to put in, and I'll leave that work to you guys, but you could plug in what ranges you think you're getting to the turn and plug in this 10 turn and actually find out whose range is better for. And if it truly is better for us, then that means we probably do want to start betting again quite a bit theoretically, but somewhat, I guess, exploitative thinking. Like I said, people do tend to check back on these turns quite a bit. And he just folds. And we take it down. Okay. We min open. He shoves, and we're folding. Big shove. Keep in mind, this guy's probably a recreational player. For that, easy fold here. As the under the gun opener, this board texture is not the greatest for us. Some guys don't even open pocket 2s and pocket 4s from under the gun. So that's a problem against some opponents who are gonna view this board as very, very good for the big blind calling range and not so good for the opener. Yeah, you have all the overpairs here, but he has probably some, all the 2-4 suited combos, probably 9-4 suited. Some guys will even have 9-2 suited here. He has all the sets here in this spot. He has more of the straight draws, like 3-5 suited, 5-6 suited, all the back doors as well. I think we're going to find that you don't have a very significant equity advantage if you have one at all here, depending on what your opening range is. I mean, if you do open 2s and 4s here, you guys are going to end up being somewhat close, but this is a board where we could probably just check back our whole range, and if it goes check on the turn, just start doing some delayed c-bets. Plan to defend a little bit aggressively on a lot of turns versus a bet versus him, just because when we are checking back our whole range, we're going to be getting to the turn with a much stronger range in general. But if we are betting here, I think that a little bit smaller bet sizing is going to be better for us, just because we're basically hoping to get stuff like Jack 10, Queen 10, that don't have flush draws and stuff like that to fold. And again, it's a spot where with our value hands we can bet small and protect with a lot of our range and protect ourselves against check raises versus this guy. Because even with aces, kings, queens, even with our one pair hands, when we get check raised on this board, we're not folding, but we're not very excited unless we're against a completely more maniacal player. So when you're looking at a board texture where you're against a tough aggressive opponent, you're going to be probably facing quite a bit of check raises. I think also that means that our c-bet wants to be smaller as well. So. And then when we do get check called, we can size up on the turn. We call, or he calls, we get a gut shot here. And then I'm guessing the plan is to also rip in a big bet on a spade river. So with the queen here, I think we are going to continue to bet. And we do get, looks like, just over a check min raise. I think that's on 11. I can't see. It's 14. Okay. I think we're gonna end up walking into sets quite a bit. We block things like Jack 10, which could be bluffing here. King Jack, which could potentially be bluffing here. I don't think we need to be calling with this specific combo here. I think we can just fold. If he was significantly deeper and we had the gut shot outs and we had some quite a bit of fold equity on a spade river with our jack, I think calling and planning to rip in a big bluff on the spade when he checks to us is a pretty nice option, or get a ton of value when we hit our 10, stuff like that. I think it makes more sense. But here at these stack depths, and like I said, with a range, when he's in the small blind, he's still going to get to this turn with a decent number of 2 pairs and sets that kind of slow play the flop. I think we just are going to have a lot of better stuff here that can continue versus check raise, so I would just find a fold here. We end up calling, we get the 8 on the river, he jams, and we end up folding. And if this was a 5, I would be much more excited about calling here, given that we would have a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw. We still do have some backdoor straight equity, but I'm gonna end up folding this hand here. We can find a little bit stronger hands to continue to the turn, but against this this sizing, we do want to be trying to dig pretty deep into our range to find continues here. Oh, I guess we can check and see, make sure that the fold happened. I just kind of assumed. We did call, okay. We get the 5 of spades on the turn. Goes check, check. 7 on the river. I think this hand plays pretty nice, going for a pretty big check raise. Reason being is if it goes check, check, we're going to win its showdown some percent of the time. Against his, I don't know, King X and Queen X c-bets that gave up on the turn. And when he does bet, there are some times where like a weak ace X or a 9X check back the turn to just try to get the showdown, and might decide that when you check again, they can go for a really thin value bet, and then we can check raise and end up with a ton of folds, depending on his sizing. We'll have to see the sizing before we decide to check raise. But the other option is we could just turn our hand into a bluff with a donk overbet to like 22 or something, like 2x, a pretty big overbet, and we would be repping miss flush draws. And then I think if we ended up having like pocket 8s or pocket 9s that slow play the flop, that would be a reasonable line. I don't think 6x or pocket 6s is too much of a worry here. I don't think it's enough of his range for us to really consider that he could have a straight. Jack 10 also is not much of a worry, but we do have those sets that could be value betting, and then also our Jack 10 and hands like 6-7, 6-4 suited. It looks like mine called here 5-6 suited, stuff like that. So I mean, we do have a ton of possible straights here, and but there are a decent number of missed flush draws and backdoor flush draws and stuff like that. So an overbet donk would be another really good option. So let's see what we do here. This is not the line, because now he just has an easy call with all of those weak one pair hands that check back. I think he's going to be able to find a call here if he's thinking at all, just because there's, I mean, if you're floating with 4-7 here, there's just so many missed flush draws and missed backdoors and all that kind of stuff here that I think this is a bet that should be an easy call here for a lot of people. We do get the fold, so that works out, but I think an overbet matches with our range a little bit better. We open for 3 this time. We get the fold. Nice. Easy 3-bet and then call it off. In position here with these stack sizes, I think we could go just a touch smaller, but I think this bet sizing is okay as well. If you wanted to develop some kind of range here, you know, that where you're 3-bet and then potentially folding versus jam, you could, you know, try to get it as small as possible, and then with your value hands, I mean, you're still getting value, you're still getting play into position if he just calls, and it's going to be easy to play for stacks post flop. And then still at the stack size, people are just going to tend to jam or fold a decent portion of the time, even versus the small bets, because they're scared to play out of position or, you know, whatever reason. So you still kind of get that effect with your strong hands as well. If you do end up having a read that they're just going to defend by calling and very rarely jamming, then I do like a bigger sizing. Even with your bluffs as well, because getting to see the flop and play in position is going to be to your advantage when you when you see the flop, you're just going to be betting a polarized range, right? So you're going to have your really strong value hands, and then you're going to have your bluffs that are going to have some fold equity on the flop. So, and here, I don't think we need to go. Once we bet half pot here, we're basically telling him that we're never folding. So I would prefer a smaller bet sizing. Even something like a quarter pot at these stack sizes is going to generate you quite a bit of fold equity versus a lot of parts of his range if you're trying to bluff. And, you know, versus his one pair hands or flush draw hands, you're probably getting check raised anyways. You might induce a couple wider bluffs just because he might think he has some fold equity. And then another thing is you're going to get a lot of calls from hands that might just fold when you bet half pot, to try to see a turn and just see what happens. So at these stack sizes, I don't think the sizing is where we want to go, and with this specific hand especially. But he does call. Dreams do come true, and on the turn, we're just getting it in now. And he folds. But keep in mind you have 3 streets here to get his stack in. And so let's say you wanted to value bet all 3. We could bet 4 on the flop. That would put it another 8. So the pot would be 24. He would have 20 left behind. On the turn, you could bet something like 5. And there would be, that would put him 10. So the pot would be 34 and he would have 15. And you're just, you know, using all 3 streets to try to get as much value as you can versus like the weakest parts of his range, and then still giving him opportunities to put it in with a bunch of things that your big bets would have gotten it in with anyways. So a lot of times you want to just try to use all 3 streets for value against some opponents. And when you have short stack sizes, really small bet sizes can let you do that. I'm pretty cool with just raising this hand here, using a really polarized raising strategy against this guy. When he's limping, after he's, the last, pretty much every time it's been blind versus blind, he's opened 3.5x against us. So 3-8 just has so little value going to the flop and post flop. So I'm pretty cool with raising this. If you do check back, I mean, it's definitely not going to be minus EV to check back either. So I would make it probably 3.5 or 4 against his limp though. Even with our value hands as well. We get this flop, and it's definitely one we're going to c-bet. And he calls, and I think once he calls here with his hand, we can just be done. I don't know how much 10x we have in our range that's raising, and then betting the flop would be like ace 10, king 10, probably queen 10, jack 10, just check back a bunch. Pocket 10s probably checks back a bunch. I guess if we're raising like 9-10 or 10-3 suited, stuff like that. I think for the most part we're just giving up as he calls a flop. He's repped a little bit of a stronger range or something that has some showdown value. It goes check check, and on the river we use the full house options to put in a pot size bet, and I like it. I think ace king is certainly a hand that we would have checked back on this turn. Aces, queens, jacks, kings, I think on this turn where he can have probably more straights than us. I do like the check back, and then we get the, we're trying to rep the full house on the river, going for a big bet. I'm down. I'm certainly down with that. Nice river for us, a nice bet. The only time I would be okay with this is if we're on the money bubble. My guess is with the blinds so small that we're probably not. I mean, mean, you've got this guy that's got a reshove stack size, but also looks like he's going to be a guy that's just calling a bunch, given that 3-bet pot that we had where he called a 3-bet and then check called the flop and check folded. He's probably just going to be in there with a bunch of, with a pretty wide range, and with your 6-2, you're going to have a hard time getting value and have a hard time also finding a bunch of boards where you're going to probably be able to bluff him off at this stack size. You've got a guy that seems pretty aggro in position, and this guy's not 3-betting very much, but he's playing pots. I think, yeah, so on the bubble, reasonable. Any other time, we're just going to fold this hand always. They all fold, though, so we take it down. So I'm guessing we're not on the bubble because we're folding the king-9 here. So for example, if we have a tournament dynamic where opening the 6-2 or 6-3 or whatever it was in that other pot is okay, then opening the king-9 under the gun is certainly going to be okay under the same tournament dynamics. So just something to keep in mind there. I would put in a pretty small check raise here on this board versus this guy and just expect to get a ton of value. Something like 5.5. We check call, and he's betting again. I think we need to start check raising. You need to place 10. So one, as we saw with that the 3-bet pot, is that he's going to be calling our bets and raises with probably a pretty wide range, which means that we're actually going to be getting thinner calls versus him. And two, this is a board where you're just handing him a ton of equity out of position, and you're also giving him, like, when he gets to see the river and then check back this hand, which you certainly could have gotten more value from on the turn, and maybe even the flop, given that he had the backdoor, some backdoor straights and a backdoor flush. We just are handing him a bunch of equity, and I don't think against this kind of guy, I mean, I don't think against anybody we want to do that, but this is definitely a spot where just trying to pile in a bunch of chips out of position is going to be the way to go for sure. Okay. We're opening 3 here. I don't think we need to go this large with these stack sizes left behind. We get jammed on. That's probably the reason we're 3x open, out of position. Seems okay. He jams again. Okay, so we're going to be tightening up versus this guy a little bit. I think he's showing, I mean, if he's just going to be jamming a bunch, we want to be probably limping a lot and going for limp raises, and then raising with like a more polarized range where we have some very easy folds, and then obviously can call the jam. Yeah, on the button, I don't think we need to go for the 3 sizing. I'm a little more happy to just check this one back, not open ourselves up to a limp raise, and we get to see a flop in position and use our positional advantage to you know, build a pot post flop if we want, or keep the pot small if we want. We do end up raising, and he folds. I think probably against this guy we're going to be wanting to limp a more, or raise a more polarized raising range. It could be, I mean, we did see the first couple times he was opening 3.5 big blinds into our big blind, and then now we started the limp, so maybe he just raises his strong stuff and then limps all his weak stuff, and if that's the case, then basically we want to be raising every time he limps, but we don't really know that yet. So for now I would stick with kind of a more polarized strategy. It's getting crazy. Let's see these guys. Don't really learn anything from that one. If they get to showdown with some random stuff, there would be a good opportunity to take a note, but That seems pretty standard at the stack sizes. We could certainly consider calling here. The only argument for maybe thinking about folding is the fact that this guy's so short, which means that he might have a little bit of a stronger opening range here. And then also, there are times when we do call and he goes for the jam, or he goes for a squeeze as well. And we would probably end up having to call him, but not be stoked about it. But against his range, I think the ace-8, again, something we talked about earlier. Against the cutoff range, we talked about the ace-9 hand. Ace-8 is going to be in a kind of a similar situation, so I think we could end up calling there. See the jam, he folds, okay. Now we're going for min. Yeah, I would just stick with one bet sizing. You know, find a standard bet sizing for your under the gun, for your under the gun +1, your cutoff, and your button. You know, maybe you have one sizing for under the gun +1, and then a different sizing for cutoff and button, and that's fine. Or one sizing for these 3 spots, and then a standard sizing for the cutoff, and then a standard sizing for your small blind. But you are running the risk. I've seen you open 3 big blinds with some hands, 2 big blinds with some, 2.5, you know. And it's good to adjust your sizing as the chip stacks adjust, and that could be your reason for doing it, but the chip stacks aren't really changing and getting more dynamic at this table, and we're just seeing different sizing, so you could run into some bet sizing tells eventually, and that could be a problem. So that would just be something to be careful about. There are situations at micro stakes games, you know, where people just aren't paying enough attention and using exploitative sizings with whatever hand you have, you know, making it big with some of your stronger hands and, you know, some of your weakest polarized bluffs, and then kind of a smaller sizing with your medium hands and not really worrying about balance, I think could be a very effective strategy to micro stakes. But when we're getting up into the $55 tournaments, we're going to run into a little, you know, a little higher ratio of people who are paying attention and looking to find those exploits against you. So be careful. We fold, and that's fine. And by fine, I mean good. Here. So he's shown a couple times that he's limped with his probably weaker hands, because he limp called once and then we ended up getting a fold. That was a pretty good run out for us, and then he limp folded the next time. So I guess we don't really have too much of a read on what his limping or raising means. I think with all of our King X suited, we're certainly calling. The King 4 here, I'm probably going to either fold or 3-bet at a very small frequency. The one thing that concerns me a little bit is we've been pretty consistently aggressive against this guy, and I think it might be an opportunity to just kind of back off for a couple hands with some of the weaker stuff, because it might be a point where he's getting ready to make an aggressive play against us. So with hands like this, which are very low frequency 3-bets anyways, it might just be a good opportunity to just make them a 0 frequency 3-bet for a little bit, and have a chance at exploiting maybe any potential like metagame that this guy might think is going on against you guys. So we do fold, and that's good. I like to limp, and I like to fold. What is the deal? 32 big blinds. I think we could just want to fold here with the ace-7 suited. Man, when you got guys jamming versus your jamming 30 big blinds. I don't know if this guy's gonna jam 40 big blinds, but he jammed the 30 earlier. Limping seems a little bit less attractive in that case, so maybe we just take the ace-6 and turn it into a 3-bet sometimes. I know I just talked about backing off against this guy. But this is a situation where even if he does think there's an aggressive metagame against you, you're 3-betting with 3 players left to act. I think this is a spot where it's going to be much harder for him to find a bunch of 4-bet bluffs than it would be in the blind versus blind type scenarios or button versus cutoff type scenarios. So this is a little better situation to go for some 3-bets like this against maybe him specifically, but I mean, we still got to keep in mind that we got 3 guys left to act. But I am not liking calling as much with this kind of hand just because of these guys left. So I would probably end up folding this, being that we're in the cutoff, or putting in a small 3-bet. We fold, and that's reasonable. And would be checking back here. Flopping top pair, gonna bet for protection. And going to keep betting for protection and value. And going to call. Nice. His bet size in the river is just too small. I mean, it could be hands like we saw, 2x, betting for protection. It could be some just pure bluffs. I mean, this bet size is just way, way too small. So definitely calling there, heads up. Almost want to consider betting for value against this guy. And it's probably worth it. I would put out like a third pot c-bet or something on this and expect him to call with probably all of his weak ace-x that got here. He's going to have hands like 4-5, 5, 2 suiteds probably, you know, all the heart draws, 8-9. I mean, you could just keep listing a bunch of stuff that kind of connects to this board that we're ahead of, and then also it allows us to get value on any queen or an ace turn, or check back a lot of other turns and try to get an extra chance to get our ace or queen. So we do bet, he calls. 4 turn I think is probably quite a bit better for him than for us, so I'm just going to check back this turn. 10 river, probably just going to check it back. He bets, and I'm pretty comfortable. I'm actually thinking we might want to call here. So his 2-5 did get there, but on this 10 river, like some of his 6-4s and 3-4s that got there got counterfeit, so I don't think he's going to bet those. He probably has a ton of missed draws here. And I do think that some of his 10x might consider just check raising on the flop, given his stack size and given our bet size. So, yeah, I think this might actually be a reasonable spot to go for a hero call. We end up folding. That was kind of my initial reaction to seeing a bet is we probably just fold here. But then after thinking about it, when we're looking at just how many missed things he can have here, and the fact that he's going to be check raising or should be check raising his 10s at some frequency, and probably isn't value betting a 6 or 3 or 4 for that size, I think the ace queen high could make a call there and be making a plus EV call. I guess under the gun when you got like this guy shoving and this guy calling a bunch and you're going to be out of position. I'm fine with folding it under the gun. He opens, queen 3 suited, we're calling for sure. In position, even though he's going 3.5, we're going to want to play all of our ace, king, and queen suiteds. Making those good flushes is going to be nice for us. And our positional advantage, especially when we're still a little bit deep here, is going to be another bonus. So I would call there with a queen 3. Queen 3 off is a definite fold. And another check back opportunity. We do check, good. Do have a gut shot and only 10 high, so I'm definitely going to be turning our hand to a bluff here. Goes check, check. If he checks again, we might consider trying to rep a 4 or a 7 that check back and put out a bet. Yeah, I do think we're missing a bluffing opportunity here. He's checked to us twice now. We only got 10 high. We don't have any showdown value. I mean, it's definitely reasonable for him to consider that we might have checked back some 7x, and when it goes check again, that we're going to be betting it small for protection or value. We certainly have some 4x to check back that could be betting. And he bets, and I think we just have to fold here. Probably just going to call versus this guy. And just going to start with a check on the flop. I don't think we have many big aces that we can rep, or in kings, things like that we can rep. So okay, and he bets just under half pot here on the river, and we obviously, I think if we get a 10, we're going to get his entire stack, and some of the time maybe a queen is going to be good for us when he has like pocket 10s, or 8x, or some weak stuff like that. But I think a lot of the time it's going to be some sort of slow plays. So let's make it easy and say we have 5 outs, and just give the credit that some of the time this queen or jack's gonna be good for us, and then a 10 is obviously always good for us. So 5 outs, if we just use the rule 2 and 4, 5 times 2 means we have about 10% equity going to the river, which means that we need to be getting 9 to 1 odds in order to make the call. So you can see here we're getting 3 to 1 odds because there's this bet and then these 2 bets here. So we have to call 1 bet to get 1, 2, 3 bets. So that means that we need 9 times this bet size. And there's already 3 there, so it means that we need 6 more of these bets. 3 times 6 is 18, which means that he doesn't have enough money left behind in order for us to actually profitably call here with our if we're kind of guessing and saying that we have about 5 outs on average. So when he's betting half pot here and we have the gut shot, and are probably going to be folding or pretty much folding all the rivers when it gets jammed to us, and probably don't have any showdown value when if it goes check, or very, very little showdown if it goes check on the river. I think this ends up being a fold for us. So again, a quick way to do the math without, you can see we didn't need a calculator for that, but we're looking at our hand, and we're just going to guess our outs. We're going to say, it looks here like I have, 4 outs for sure, but probably some small percent of the time a queen or a jack is going to be good for us for parts of his range, so we'll say that's an extra out. Be a little bit optimistic. So we have 5 outs. Rule 2 and 4 says that's about 10% equity. With 10% equity, that means we need 9 to 1 odds. If you guys are not sure about how to go from percents or from fractions to ratios, or ratios back to fractions, because 3 to 1 is a ratio, but 1/10 or 10% is a fraction. If you guys aren't sure how to go back and forth from that, there's tons of videos online on YouTube. I do have a video that has basic poker math as well that kind of talks about the differences between those. If you guys want to check that out, but if that doesn't help you there's tons of videos on this subject. But anyways, at 10% we need about 9 to 1 odds, or exactly 9 to 1, which means that we need 9 times this bet, because this is the bet that we're going to be calling. There's already basically 1, 2, 3 of the bets in, which means that we need 6 more bets. 6 times 3 is 18, which means that we cannot win enough money on the river, even if we get all of his money when we hit our 10. So we have a fold here. We do call, and we see an 8 on the river, and he jams, and obviously we're folding. He's probably not quite deep enough for us to want to call with a 6-5 suited here. Against this stack size, high card value goes up quite a bit, and the suited connector value goes down pretty significantly here, so I would end up folding this. I think a min open is okay. And 2 callers, not the greatest board for us. I'm just going to check back with ace king. Nice check back and fold. Multi-way here. Again, this board just isn't the best for us. I would be folding ace king unless we had one of them had a diamond. Probably just actually raise this pre-flop. Again, it's, I mean, pretty darn weak hand. I think at these stack sizes, we're going to probably put him in like a spot where he feels like he wants to jam or fold a bunch. And, you know, raising with a polarized range against a guy that's going to be 4-bit jamming or folding, I think is a pretty good strategy. But again, I mean, checking back obviously has some EV because your hand does have some equity versus range, and you do have position. So, I mean, checking back definitely is not a bad strategy, but we could start developing some 3-bets from him. There was the thing that I talked about a little bit ago where, you know, maybe we'd been aggressive against this guy for quite a while, and you know, maybe we wanted to back off for a little bit and just cut out some of the pure bluffs from our range. But that was, you know, quite a few hands ago. We haven't really done anything aggressive from him. So I think that metagame might have been, if that even was on his mind, I think it might have faded away at this point. But if you were thinking about that kind of metagame consideration, then, I mean, good for you. And if you thought that still existed, then definitely I would much prefer a check back. And we barrel the turn. That's reasonable. I mean, he's probably going to have a bunch of just like 2x and weaker hands that called. I'm okay with this. He does call, and we're 100% giving up on the river. We do barrel, and he folds. I think we got a little bit lucky here that he... as far as barrels go, this is probably one of the better ones because, well, I would prefer like 6, if we're going to talk about like the best barrel, something like 6, 7 offsuit. The reason being is that it doesn't block, like having the jack block some of his things like Jack 10 that called twice because of the gut shot, or King Jack that went for the limp call and called down, and those are the things that are going to fold the river for us. And this spade isn't really a factor, but the 3 does block things like maybe some 5-3 suiteds that limp called and then called because of the gut shot, and 3-4 suiteds and things like that. So not blocking flush draws, I think, is pretty important for us, and not blocking gut shots and stuff like that, if we are going to be bluffing, is going to be a pretty big deal. I don't know. I think most guys, if they're check calling the flop and check calling the river with any hand that had showdown value, check calling flop, check calling turn with any hand that had showdown value is check calling the river. So probably our bluff sizing here doesn't actually need to be this big, because we're just looking to get his draws to fold, that like his king high, king jack type stuff, and Jack 10 type stuff, and then also his things like pocket 3s, pocket 4s. basically what I'm saying is here is, although this bluff worked, I don't necessarily think this is the best spot for us to barrel for 3 streets. I think we're probably going to end up getting called here more than we think. But I do think if we are bluffing the river, we probably actually don't need to use this big of a sizing. We could use a little bit smaller sizing, and we're still going to be able to get those really weak hands to fold just because they're really weak and can't really do much else. And we can still rep our ace X that might be continued bet for value, and our queen X is trying to just go for a smaller value bet because his range is certainly pretty weak when he gets to this river. So, well, he has weak hands in his range, I think is a better way to say it. I would not put it past him to have ace X that gets to the river this way and to have queen X in his range that gets to the river this way. Okay. So anyways, there's that hand. And we do for the polarized raise. Nice. I think actually at these stack sizes, 3 is probably reasonable. It's still going to put him into, a lot of people are going for limp jams or limp folds with a large chunk of their range, so going for 3 instead of like 3.5 or 4 feels pretty good to me. Probably just bet here for value and protection. I like the small bet. We get check raised and get put in a weird spot. This is a guy that was check calling and taking pretty passive lines. I can't remember him taking an aggressive line against us, but okay, yeah, we've seen 0 check raises, a lot of check calling. I'd actually be okay to just fold the 9s right now against this guy. He doesn't rep like the strongest kings, but he can still have hands like king 5 offsuit that decides to check raise there. You know, those weak kings are going to add up to a ton of combos of king X. He could be check raising here with a bunch of similar 10x type hands. You're flipping against all of his straight draws that he has on this board. If he has queen jack or and then the flush draws with the 2 overs if he has anything like well, I guess ace jack is not going to be a thing, very likely. Ace queen's not a thing. Queen, but the queen jack offsuits are there, yeah. So yeah, I think we're just totally cool folding against this guy. Against a more aggressive opponent who hadn't been taking a bunch of passive lines against us, I think we would have to be put in a tough spot there. We're not in this hand anymore. Pretty good flop for a specific hand. I think we just bet and we'll have to call a raise. He folds. When the flop goes check check, there are some like ace jack and king jack in his range that check back, but I think he has a lot more of just ace king, ace queen type stuff, king queen type stuff. Probably gonna bet here for protection. The one thing to consider is that when we do have the king, we don't need as much protection. So considering going for a check call or taking a little bit passive line here is a little bit better when we have the king kicker than when we don't. So we do check. He bets. I'm going to be calling here. 8 on the river. I think we can just check fold on this river. Reason being is when he checks back the flop, there's just so many 8s in our range that if he's betting this river, I think it's going to be like a slow played. I think it's going to be a very, very strong hand. more often than not because this river is just so good for us after the flop check check in turn check call that if he does start betting, I would be quite worried. Him waking up with fours here is a little bit unfortunate, but I do think I like this line. I think we have plenty of showdown here with our king two after the way it was played, and there's not really a need to turn our hand into a bluff here. Here, this is a clear shove. And I don't know what we get to rip. I mean, 13 big blinds, we're shoving almost all of our ace-x. We do have some 10x, but I mean, we're probably slow playing it a decent chunk of the time at these stack sizes and checking back. I guess we could consider betting and just getting him to fold some of his give-ups because our fours does need protection against even his give-ups is reasonable. But first, that part of his range, we only need to bet like a third pot or something even smaller at these stack depths. So I think the clear play was to jam pre-flop. If we are gonna get to this flop, I'm probably mostly checking, and if I'm not going to check, I'm going to be betting like 1.5 big blinds or 2 big blinds at the most. And we're just giving up here. Yeah, and with as aggressive as you've been against this guy, I do expect there to be a lot of slow plays in his range, which is kind of why I was hesitant to 3-barrel the Jack 3 earlier that I talked about, and then why I'm a little bit hesitant to be betting this flop right away. But I still think we're okay to, I mean, versus his entire range, it's opening here in this spot, I think jamming the fours is going to be a very plus EV play. Whoops. King 8 suited in this spot, I think we can fold at 10 big blinds with all these guys left to act. Good fold. 8-9 suited, we would have to call here. 8-9 off, we're folding. Let's make sure we're consulting our push-fold chart here. And I don't have it pulled up yet, so be right back in 1 second. So we're at, we'll say 9 big blinds. On the button, you can see that Jack 7 off is a clear fold. So good job. Easy shove. And we hold, nice. Easy shoot. Oh, we're, yeah, still easy shove. Min open and calling a shove versus any of these guys. I think you get to play a little bit better by playing a min open strategy at this stack size. The nice thing is there's a lot of hands in your range. Like let's say you, I don't know. Let's say you have ace 7 here, and that's a hand where, or let's go a little bit stronger. Let's say you have a hand like ace 9 suited. Well, that's a hand that versus this guy's stack, you're certainly excited to get it all in. Versus this guy who shoved versus you a couple times, maybe it's a different guy. Versus the guy that was here in this spot that shoved versus you a couple times at his stack size. If it was that guy, he'd be willing to get it in. Against this guy, seems like he's aggressive. Got a good reshove stack size. I would probably be willing to get him with ace 9. And against this guy, I'd be a little bit less excited about getting it all in, given that he's shoving with 2 guys left to act. But we could still consider making a call at our stack size with the ace 9 suited. But against this guy's shove and this guy's call, we don't want to get it all in. Against this guy's shove and this guy's call, we're close. You know, against this guy's shove, this guy's call, we're we're not wanting to get it all in type stuff. So, you know, with some of those borderline hands, you end up getting to min raise and find folds versus certain actions, or you get to min raise and get a lighter shove versus some guy, right? Because now he's folding all of his, you know, ace 5 suiteds, ace 2 suiteds, you know, all those type of stuff that is going to be maybe jamming when you just min raise. So 1, you get to find folds occasionally with some parts of your range against certain actions. 2, you get to get it in against a wider range, which is going to be plus EV for you. And then also, when you're min opening instead of jamming, you get to open more hands and you get to see more flops with a little bit wider range, which, as long as they're all plus EV hands that you're opening, getting to see more flops and play more hands is going to be also better for you. So a lot of reasons to go for a min open strategy when you're at this stack size instead of just jamming. That's okay. I don't think we always have to be shoving this specific, like ace 6, ace 7, ace 8 versus a open from the cutoff. We're going to prefer like the ace 5, 4, 3, 2 that can make straights to the ace 6, 7, 8. Ace 9 is definitely going to be a shove. Let's plug this one into Hold'em Resources Calculator and just get a double check versus our small blind reshove range of this stack size versus a guy opening here in the cutoff. So give me 1 second while I add all that in. Okay, so here I've set up a scenario that's not necessarily true because he can raise and then the next action has to be shove. But I think that you're going to see that there's going to be a lot of calls from the button here, and there's going to be a lot of calls from, sorry, this is the big blind, not the button, and from the button, which means that he can't open as wide. So we end up seeing a pretty wide range here. We'll get rid of some of these. And just make all these pure. Okay, something like that. And it gets to us in the small blind, and you can see here that we're always shoving our ace-x suited, we're always shoving our pairs, and actually a little bit surprisingly, ace-6 is performing quite a bit better than ace-4, ace-3, and ace-2. I guess the difference of the pair is significant enough that the straight value isn't as impactful, but here the significance of the pairs isn't all that much, and the straight value becomes quite a bit more impactful, it seems. I think also it's going to have something to do with his... Nope, he's opening all of his ace-x, so I have nothing to do with that. But anyways, we can see here the ace-6 off is a pretty clear fold. Let's also check and see how wide the guy's calling, because that's something you always want to check when you're using these solvers is, are your opponents going to be calling as wide as this is telling you? I think this is somewhat fair. Some people are going to fold king jack off. Some people are going to fold queen 10 suited. But I think this is a reasonable calling range. I think this represents people pretty well. So that means that you're going to actually be wanting to shove pretty close to what this is saying. In a tournament scenario, I do like to cut out some of the barely plus EV hands. So this ace-7 off wouldn't be a shove for me. We'd be shoving ace-8 off plus. King jack off is doing okay enough. I guess that would be the only one I would cut out. Okay. So anyways, now we see there. Next hand. It's always good to check those every once in a while just to make sure you're not getting your thought processes in line and refreshing what you should be shoving. Here, just folding 8-10. Sixes here. I'm actually not sure. Let's double check. My guess is that with players left to act, if we are getting it all in, this is going to be the bottom of the pocket pair range. But I'm not 100% certain. Well, I was right. Sixes are the bottom of the pocket pair range. It's there's a very large gap in the review between sixes and sevens. And let's see what kind of range it has them shoving here. I don't know. People looking at a push-fold chart, they're probably going to be shoving something pretty darn close to this. So, given that almost everybody has push-fold charts these days, I guess that we would expect to be close to this, which means that we want to be somewhat close here. I think we can just get the sixes out of the range. I mean, this is basically 0 EV, and it's such a big gap between sixes and sevens that I would just say that sevens is going to be the bottom of my range. I would cut out the king queen suited, and everything else in here looks just too good to fold. So he jams, we fold, and I like it. This one's going to be pretty darn close at 11 big blinds. Let's check our handy dandy push fold chart. 11 big blinds. Queen 8 suited. Nailed it. Exactly the break-even point for your shoving range. So end up folding here. And if you go to the 12 big blinds, which we were pretty close to 12 big blinds there, it's going to be negative EV. With the threes here, should be a call. Against a range that's very, very wide, shoving into two shorter stacks, threes is going to be doing just very, very well. And I'll pull it up here to show you how well it's doing. All right, so here we have him shoving a range that looks something like this. This is just the equilibrium. I don't know. Some guys I think are going to end up getting slightly tighter than this, and I think some guys can get quite a bit wider than this depending on some tournament conditions. We are here in the big blind, and I mean, this is just like a plus EV that we can't pass up, right? 0.104. We could certainly pass up on like the king 7 suited, the queen 9 suited, the queen 10 off, king 9 off. I think all those we could get out of our range. And I think some people would probably be surprised to see that pocket threes is doing that much better than queen 9 suited. But pairs do really well when people are shoving wide ranges. So yeah, I think we need to be calling there with the threes is the moral of the story. However, if there are bubble considerations, then that changes things very drastically, and we can fold the threes for sure. King 8 here, I think we can just reshove. We'll have a small amount of fold equity, and we're probably just doing good enough against his range that's opening here. And we ran into, that's calling, I think we're going to have equity is what I meant when I said good enough against his range. And nice, scooping it up. I like it. I like the min raise strategy at the stack size like I was talking about earlier. We get shoved on and we can fold to jack 7. So this, I mean, still able to min raise here. And this is going to be doing much better for us as a min raise than like the jack 7 was, because we're actually happy to get it all in here with a player. Our hand is very, very strong there. We're happy to see a flop with a lot of the players, you know, if we're heads up versus their calling ranges. Min raising here, and probably will end up calling a shove versus either of these guys. And let me plug that in and we'll just double check what our min-raise calling ranges on the button. Okay, here, so we're opening on the button, and it says if we're doing the min open, and then they're only jamming or folding and never calling, this is our range. So we're at these stack sizes, we're very, very valuing high cards. That's something that's a big takeaway from this is high card value becomes very important. You don't see us opening a lot of these smaller suited connectors and things like that, which you'll see much more so in the ranges at deeper stack sizes. But we do open, and if the small blind shoves and it comes back around to us as a fold, we're definitely calling the ace-9 as I expected. And I would probably end up folding like the 10-9, the jack-9, the queen-9, the ace-3 off. I would have actually probably ended up folding like ace-4 off, but you can see this is actually doing pretty well. So there's that. And then if the big blind jams, we're going to get quite a bit wider. Not as much wider as I thought. But you can see like the king 10's getting in there. We now need to start calling with jack 10 pretty comfortably. So we get a little bit wider, but not actually as much as I thought. So there you go. There's those ranges. And they folded. Okay, yeah. Aces. Still, actually 15. Basically, if I'm over 15 blinds, I think using a min-raise strategy is going to be pretty nice for us. Once we get down to like 14, 13, probably going to be doing quite a bit more just open jamming. So I think we could still min-raise here. We get called though. And we take down the ace queen at nice. Holding strong. Mm, 14 big blinds effective. I think limping a bunch of hands like this is going to be pretty nice for us. Min-raising. Min-raising when the stacks get this shallow actually does probably generate some fold equity versus range. It allows us to min-raise and fold versus his jams with hands like this. So it becomes a little bit more reasonable at these stack depths, but I think limping is going to be just as good for us because we're going for a lot of limp calls or limp reshoves, depending on what he does with some of our stronger hands as well. Good flop. I think we just put out a 1.5 big blind bet or something like that. We throw out the 1. That seems okay at these stack sizes, and the fact that he didn't jam, I mean, the ace is going to be probably much better for us than for what's in his range. And going to continue on this turn. And we get the fold. Nice. Again, as we saw from the solver, when we have these stack sizes left behind, we're much more valuing our king high, ace high, and king high blockers because it stops a lot of their hands that are in the reshove range. So, I mean, we could technically min open this and fold to a jam. I like the c-bet sizing on this board. On the 2 here, I think we can give up with this specific combo on this turn. One thing to keep in mind is one thing to keep in mind here is he did call in the cutoff, and so he had quite a bit of people left to act that he had to be concerned about, which means his range is going to be stronger. He did float you on this flop. Doesn't have a lot of draws out there, and not a lot of 9x or 4x in his range, so that again is going to make his range a little bit stronger. I guess, I mean, there is the chance that this guy could just be a big-time recreational player and be super wide, and we don't know that because we haven't seen any hands on him, but in general here, I think once we get called and we don't turn any extra equity, I think we're just going to give up. We do plan on barreling and really just want to give up on this river. Yeah, and he woke up with a hand that we definitely expect in his range. And I think this is just, if you're reading the board texture and you're reading the positions and you're reading, you know, just those two things alone just signal that this guy's going to wake up with a pretty strong hand, or a hand that has a good enough showdown value to call you down more often than not. And so we can just start giving up when we don't turn in the equity and not be bluffing it off there. Mid open's probably fine here. But again, notice you're not jamming these hands, but you're jamming like your ace queens and all your strong hands. I mean, against players that are paying attention, that makes you very, very exploitable. So I would, again, we talked about it a little bit ago, but you know, look at your stack size and pick a bet sizing and pick a range and do the same thing with that whole range, right? So from this position here, if I'm min raising Jack 8, I'm also min raising aces, kings, queens, you know, ace, queen. I'm min raising my entire range that's going to continue from this spot here. What is happening? I guess I just fold the Jack 8. I think a lot of times we're going to call and we're opening ourselves up to get re-raised by this guy. And then we're just going to end up having to fold. This is a pretty speculative open from this position anyways. Fold and he calls. I'm interested to see what these guys show up with here. Silly. Silly, silly. Okay. Again, no need to jam this here. Let's actually limp it at these stack sizes, right? Give him a chance to raise over the top of us so we can jam. And also when we're limping our ace king, that means we get to limp a bunch of other hands protected that he can't just raise us off all the time, right? So much prefer a limp there. But we get called by the ace 10. And see, that's a hand that would have probably raised and called it off versus anyways, had we just limped or just jammed versus. So we're getting against these kind of hands no matter what, but getting it in against even weaker hands, or getting, you know, we limp and it checks back and we get flop on board textures where we versus hands that would always just fold when we limp, or getting hands that would always just fold when we, always fold when we jam. Getting some of those hands to raise and then fold versus our jam, or jam and we get to call versus hands that we're just getting a ton of value from, I think is a pretty nice strategy for us at that stack size. So keep that in mind. I will say though, there are a lot of strong players out there who, you know, under 20 big blinds just develop a jamming range in the small blind and jam whatever, you know, whatever this Hold'em Resources Calculator solver says is plus EV to jam, and just do that. And I mean, if you have that strategy developed where you have a range and that's your jamming range and you're just always doing that, then that's going to be a fine strategy as well. But me personally, I prefer to go with the limping or the min raising instead of just jamming the, you know, 15 plus big blinds. And here, well, we're pretty deep now, so I guess we're deep enough where we're not just open shoving a bunch. And also deep enough where I don't like the min raise anymore. When we were against the 13 big blind stack, it made quite a bit more sense here. I don't think it accomplishes hardly anything for us. And especially with this kind of hand. So I would either raise larger with a polarized range as a kind of a bluff, or just limp with everything. He does call, we get this flop. I expect his range to be very, very, very wide. And also somewhat capped, because I expect to see some 3-bets for us from like aces, kings, queens, you know, all those overpairs, and stuff like that. He can have some 6x, he can have some 9x for sure, but I think for the most part, because this range is so wide and we do have a pair, we're going to be betting for protection. And he folds. Okay. This is probably okay at these stack sizes, but if we had some reshoves, stack sizes. I think this hand is definitely a fold against guys who are playing pretty aggressive. I mean, we do have this guy here who's got a 13 3-bet, but he woke up with kings that one hand, and I think in only 17 hand sample, that was probably it. So it's probably going to be okay. But against any sort of kind of guys that are going to show any resistance here, this is just a fold on the button. And can see bet 1/3 on this flop. And we can check shove down and then fold. So that's one thing that I've noticed is that our c-bet sizes are typically too big. So definitely look for spots where when board textures are very dry, or when we have a strong, even on, you know, what people would consider very draw heavy board textures, but in a spot where our range is much, much stronger than the opponent's range, that's still a place where we can go for very small c-bets. And also there are, what hand was it? So like on this board texture here, although this is a very draw heavy board texture, this is a spot where the 1/3 c-bet is actually very effective because he's probably going to end up being put in a check shove spot with a lot of his range given our stack size. And he's got a ton of hands that are very, very weak that we're just happy to get to fold right now. So putting out a 1/3 c-bet here makes a lot of sense because with our bluffs, we're giving ourselves the best price to just take the pot down versus those very, very weak things in our range. When we have a 5, we're protecting a little bit from, like, I don't think we're getting much value here because I think a lot of his draws are just going to check raise. But, you know, if he has 9x, right, he's got some backdoor straights, he's got some an overcard that can come. If we check back here, a club can come and he can just decide to bluff it. A king, queen, or whatever can come and he can decide to bluff it. I mean, we're preventing him from bluffing with a bunch of stuff that would just fold into our little 1/3 bet. So on these kind of board textures, sometimes betting 1/3 is actually a reasonable option as well, for some of those reasons I was talking about. Ace-6 off here under the gun is actually going to be a fold. All of our ace-x suiteds get opened, but the ace-6 off is one that we're not going to play. We get this flop with 2 guys left to act. This is not a good board for us. This is not a good hand for this board. We do have a backdoor straight, but that's not enough here for us to want to be betting. We're just check giving up here always. And definitely not bet calling versus a min raise. This guy's range is going to be very, very strong in general when there's a guy left to act. And I mean, we're just having to give up on pretty much every single turn. We're going to have much, much better hands in our range here that can continue. And easy all in. Taking him down. So again here, I would much prefer to see a limp. Here on this board, we're okay to just c-bet. This is going to be a pretty good board for us. We take it down. With the king queen, you can limp jam a lot. If you limp and he jams, you can call. Got a lot of good stuff going on for you there. It's probably okay. But this is a spot where, like, if you're developing a nice strong limping range, you can probably limp with the king high. It's going to be doing just fine against a range that's checking back. Having a high card value is pretty important when you're short stacked. So you know, if you are protecting your limping range by limping your strong hands like your king queen and your ace kings and stuff like that, then you start to get adding hands like this as a limp, which is going to be plus EV, getting that you're getting to the flop with a discount, and that he can't just raise you like crazy because you're well protected. But if you are developing a raise or fold strategy, then we're just going to have to probably fold the king 3. Unless we have a read that this guy's just folding a bunch. It becomes okay to raise a little bit wider when these guys get a little bit deeper. This guy has a harder time 3-betting you when he's, you know, opening up a stack against this guy that has him covered. But this guy's still getting to play like the push-fold game against you once he folds, so he can still jam on you against a pretty wide range. And this guy is aggressive, so maybe he just still finds some 3-bets as well. I mean, we're only risking 2 big blinds here, so it's going to be okay, but definitely make sure we're not opening too wide on the button when we start getting down to this short stack like this. And like I said, the solver, when we showed it, it valued, as we get down to the short stacks, it values all of our ace X, all of our king X, all of our queen X much more than these kind of suited connectory type hands. And c-betting on this board. This board is okay for a little bit bigger sizing with a polarized range. But I still think you can actually get away with a 1/3 here decently. There's a lot of just random stuff in his range that doesn't connect to this at all that, you know, 7 high is definitely valuing from getting a fold. Oops. Not going to be opening 5-4 suited here from this spot with our stack sizes. When it goes check, check, I think we just want to start betting for value here. Probably something like 2/3 pot or 3/4 pot, somewhere in that range. I think a little bit small here, but definitely glad that we bet instead of check. 8 of clubs river. Probably going to go with something like a 35% or 30% or some kind of block bet for value here, trying to get some ace high calls, some 6x calls, some pocket queens, pocket jacks, pocket tens, stuff like that. And I think half pot's going to be a little bit too big. Yeah, it's a little too big. We can block bet for a smaller amount. But we do get called, and nice. It's probably big enough where we could just consider just calling. The other option would be like doing a min raise. That could be something that you could be perceived to be doing with some hands that are decent, but could still maybe consider folding to his jam. You know, some guys might think that. But I think this is actually big enough where we could feel like we're somewhat protected by just calling, and he just can't call with any, you know, a super wide range, so we don't need a raise for protection. But I think those are our 2 options, either just min raise or call. Jamming, I think, is definitely our least exciting option, because now it gets him to fold a bunch of stuff that actually could have continued versus our call that our kings are happy to see get in there, and we're just isolating. I mean, whatever is going to continue here, we're obviously happy against the range that would continue, but I think we get a little bit wider range by just calling. However, if we were like 20 big blinds effective with this guy, we're probably just jamming, right? Because we're never calling and folding, so we're not repping anything weak by calling. And so at 20 big blinds effective, something like that, 22 big blinds effective, you know, in that range, I'm just jamming. Almost 50, I think we can call and try to get him in the pot, try to get some more chips. This is probably okay to call at his effective stack size. like we talked about earlier, making a top pair or a nice pair hand is going to be more valuable as the stacks get shallower. We're getting a good price. We've got some connected value as well. So I would consider calling that there. And we're folding here. With tight blinds, I'm okay with calling. As these guys get shallower and have good squeeze stacks to shove with, then I'm probably considering doing like a really small 3-bet and trying to take it down, or just folding here. I think we want to be opening 2.2 or min or 2.5. 3 at these stack sizes isn't really necessary. Note the size of this guy's 3-bet and the fact that this guy folded. I mean, this guy's getting a very, very good price. 2.52 to 1. He only needs 28% equity. He's going to be in position. I would just keep that in mind and might make a note that this guy might either be overfolding to 3-bets. Well, he's definitely overfolding to 3-bets, but also there's a good chance that his range is probably just too wide here, which is what's causing the overfolding to 3-bets. Obviously, we've only seen one example, but I don't know, just something to note. This guy was able to 3-bet off a 20-something big blind stack. 29-ish or whatever that was, and get a fold from that guy for a very good price. And going to be calling here. 3-bet is reasonable. It's actually kind of, I like the sizing as well, given the effective stack sizes. This is one thing that's kind of nice that even myself in my own game probably don't do enough, is you actually get to apply a ton of pressure to someone at this stack size with a very small 3-bet. Right, you're almost essentially putting him in a push-fold spot here. I think stronger players are going to be able to find a lot of calls here, but against most players in an MTT player pool, they're probably going to feel like they're in a push-fold spot and just end up likely overfolding. So when you have a nice king blocker here against what could be a wide range, given that it's a button open, I like this. This is pretty good. Good for you. And fold. Min opening here and calling a jam versus either of these guys. No jams. Just going to start with a check here. Good check. Going to call 1 against this guy. And probably give up on most turns. But I think he's going to be able to find some stab bluffs here for this sizing for sure. He could even be betting this with like pocket 8s or things like that that called on the flop. I think the price is too good, and the stab opportunity is probably too good here when you're checking to him. So I would find a call once with the 10s and kind of evaluate, make some decisions on the turn. So this is another similar spot to the King 5. If you're considering 3-betting those King X hands, these Ace X hands are going to be probably actually even slightly better, given the fact that you're blocking a few more of the combos that can continue. But calling is also okay. And we do have a decent amount of equity here with our ace and with the backdoor straight. I wouldn't hate a call here. You could use maybe some like boards that have diamonds, as if you want to like try to make sure you're not calling too much, you could use a board that has like a diamond, so you could have like on a diamond turn, diamond river type run out, you could, you know, have a bluff occasionally and, you know, use that to regulate your frequencies a little bit, but I don't think that's a very important consideration for that. If important at all, but just keep in mind that we actually probably have more equity on this board than what you might think, and calling is probably not a terrible idea. King high, I'm going to be going for a min open here. A nice flop. Easy 1/3 pot c-bet. We're checking back. Checking back is okay, because at these stacked ups, you know, you might actually rep, against some players, you might rep king a little bit more, like you're slow playing kings on the flop on a pretty dry board. So putting this in kind of a delayed c-bet strategy, I don't think is bad at all. I think I do think that this is a board texture though, where if you wanted to just c-bet a third pot with 100% of your opens, that would also be a very reasonable strategy. And we need to start betting. We got to find a way to get money into this pot somehow. And he folds, and that's going to be expected the vast majority of the time. Kings, here we go. And I think we can go with our small 3-bet like we did before against him for 6. We decided slow play. That's okay at these stack sizes to do sometimes. I think if I'm going to pick a hand, I would pick aces at a much higher frequency than I would pick kings though, but it's still going to be okay. The main reason is kings have to worry about this exact kind of board where aces don't. Goes check, check, and I gotta expect that most of his ace high, unless he has like ace high with the flush draw and wants to slow play, are gonna be c-betting this flop for value. So when he checks back, he's probably got something with some showdown value, and I do think we want to start betting here small for value. Goes check, check again, and I would still just block bet here small for value. I don't imagine a ton of flushes in his range with the way this hand was played. So I would just put out like a big blind and just hope that we can get a call from a 9 or a queen that's in his range. And he did have an ace to check back, and this is something that makes sense some of the time for you know, to have some bluff catchers and have some ace high in your range when you get to the turn after a check. That's probably fine with all these reshove stack sizes after you and being out of the gun. I think we can call here. We flop a pair. So now we do see that he does have some checkbacks with some hands that other guys don't always check back. So here, given that we have the queen blocker, and given the fact that we know that he could check back some of his weak ace X's and likely a lot of his jack X, I think we're just going to check and try to get the showdown here with our 7. One big blind block bet is probably okay, but I'm fine with just checking and trying to get the showdown. That's fine in the small blind. Ace queen. Just gonna min open here. And call. Yeah, definitely calling this. There could be, I mean, he's certainly gonna have some 7x, 2x, 4x, but then there's also just a bunch of like stop and goes with like king high and queen high that I think your ace queen is just gonna have too much equity there. Ace jack, min open. Yep. We're probably getting close at 10 big blinds effective to being able to shove this Let's check our push fold chart here. 7-8 suited is doing really good. 8-7 off is still a plus EV jam here. If we go to 11, still at a plus EV jam here. I think we just need to make sure to be having a really wide shove range at this effective stack size. Let's go to 12 since we're actually probably closest to 12, and it's still a jam. And that is meaning that he needs to defend this wide here. So he's going to have to, for us to only have the 0.24, he's going to have to call with queen 6 off, queen 7 off, jack 8 off, 9-7 suited, jack 6 suited. I mean, that means he's calling with all these hands here, and I think you're going to see guys that are going to fold king, like even some of these, definitely some of those, all those ones that I mentioned. So it's going to actually be doing slightly better than what the chart says. Ace-6 offsuit here. I think at our stack size now, we're going to be finding just open shoves or folds. I think Ace-6 is likely a fold. Let's check the chart. We'll just round up to 13 big blinds in the hijack. And you can see here, just definitely not an open. Not a shove anyways, but I wouldn't even been opening it. We take it down though, so that works out. We're still in it. We're not out. We're all in here. I mean, there's just no way we could ever fold in this spot. And that is the last hand, man. Good game. I think we definitely pointed out a couple things that could be worked on. C-bet sizing was one of them. Finding spots where we shouldn't be barreling to give up, I think was another one of them. We definitely had some very good barrels on your part where you found some nice creative bluffs on some rivers that I really liked. Yeah, I think there was a lot of stuff that we talked about in this video. Hopefully everyone that watched got a little something out of it. And hopefully, especially you, Apache, hopefully there were some notes to take away from you. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll be happy to try and elaborate on any thoughts. Or you can always come to my stream. I stream under Wild Poker on Twitch for those of you that don't know, and ask me questions there, and I'm always happy to answer any questions. So thanks for watching, guys. Take it easy.